Hello, Amsterdam, and thank you for sticking around to this final session. I have a feeling probably, raise your hand if the rain kept you in. Okay, you're a very honest gentleman there. So this is going to be our Locknote session, and it's a panel of review board members and our keynote, Haroon Mir, and myself. And we're going to have this loose conversation around a couple of topics, things that came up at the conference. And also, we're going to hopefully make it interactive. Because how many people have been to panel sessions and didn't get that much out of it? I want to make it more interactive. I want to get your questions interjected. So what we'll do is we'll talk for a while, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll start trying to draw the conversation to involve you in the audience. So if you hear something that we say that's interesting, bring it up later when we go to the audience, and we'll explore your question. So before we kick it off, I've got a couple of closing announcements. One is just how the show did this year. It's a record show for us in Amsterdam. We had, all heads counted, we had over 1,500 people here, which is pretty impressive for us. So very happy. A success, and also a record number of sponsors, about 30 sponsors. And so really good growth. And so what that's telling me is these questions that we're going to explore, everybody has a need to find answers, right? It's, for some reason, we're not solving the problem fast enough. Like, more problems are being created, and so everybody is desperate for information. Everybody is desperate for solutions, and that's leading to this incredible growth that we're seeing. Not just at Black Hat, but count how many security conferences there are. You could be at one every day of the week. So we're in a really unique period right now, I think, in our industry. And I just want to call that out, because it might not be this way 10 years from now, but right now we're sort of in this golden era. And what we do with this is sort of opportunity to shape the future. Just be aware of it, right? Don't be oblivious to it. To take advantage of it. So on the social side, we've got a Twitter, Black Hat Twitter feed. We also have a Flickr page. And so if you want to see the pictures that you've seen these professional photographers taking of us and the crowd, the speakers, go to our Flickr page, Black Hat Events, and they'll start getting uploaded after the event. We also have already posted some, and we'll post more, presentation materials at the blackhat.com site. So if you saw some slides that maybe were different, you want to get the latest version of what was actually presented, blackhat.com. So here's my big announcement that you probably did not see coming. Next year, Black Hat will be November 1 to 4 in London. We're moving right into the middle of downtown London, into a really cool area, into a really cool space, and it's going to give us a lot more of a social vibe, right? We're going to be surrounded by a lot of really neat pubs and other things, and really try to tie the social in with the technical, and really help that part grow, because we've all been feeling like we don't quite have that right environment, being so far away from the hotels, and we've been trying to capture it, and unfortunately we've outgrown Amsterdam, which is really sad. So hello London, and I hope to see you there next year on the 1st to the 4th. Okay, so let's kick it off. Haroon, you're the star here. You welcome everybody to the event, and I might say it was a little bit of a doom and a gloom, kind of, not navel-gazing, but you're definitely pointing out every wart on the face of information security, right? Which is, I'm not opposed to, because I like, pointing out problems too. But you were pretty passionate about it. And so you've been thinking about this a while. So I'm kind of curious, over the time period you've thought about this, have certain things gotten better and then been replaced by new problems? Or are we essentially just accumulating problems? And we've gotten so many now that you're so frustrated that you're speaking out. Can you talk to us a little bit about the...
Yeah. So I'm hoping it wasn't all doom and gloom. Like I'm hoping...
No, you had some, suggestions.
Yeah, I'm
on what to
hoping there
do,
were some suggestions in there. But in truth, I don't think there's a lot getting better. Like, I think there are some things getting better. In fact, strangely, I think software security, despite the fact that we all slag on it, like some of it's turning around reasonably well. You look at Microsoft, and they managed to turn around a massive ship. It took them about 10 years to do it from the... And so there's signs that some stuff can be done better. But what worries me is that, like if you take the FX quote about everything being a gate, that fixing one or two of the things actually doesn't fix enough to make a meaningful impact in it all. And yeah, so I'm reasonably passionate about it, mainly because, like I said in the talk, I think lots of us entered the field kind of half naively, half thinking we're really going to dent the world.
Well,
like
and when we entered,
much.
to be too truthful, that not half of this stuff didn't exist.
Exactly.
So the problem looked a lot smaller back then. It's only gotten bigger.
It looked smaller, and in truth, like if purely selfishly, like we kind of thought we were clever enough to make a serious dent in the problem. And along the way, I think we've redefined the problem so that we still look clever. But I don't think we're making a meaningful dent in it. And I think we shifted the goalposts so that we could feel good about ourselves. But fundamentally, I think if you take why we originally got into it, we're not solving it.
So let me hit you with this analogy, and you tell me if you think it's a valid one. So when I talk to some policy people or management folks, I say, if you're going to enter security, you have to think of yourself as sort of a doctor, and maybe do a medical analogy where, so my dad is a doctor, or was a doctor until he retired, and if he entered the field telling himself that he was going to cure cancer, he would have burned out, right? But instead, he was going to fight cancer, right? And so that little mental shift probably was the difference between insanity and, being able to sleep at night. Are we in that sort of same situation where we can't tell us we're going to solve security?
Yeah, so it's a good point, and it's a good way to think about it. Like I'll have to think about it. It's a good analogy. But in truth, I think there are some things that we are doing that are horribly, brokenly wrong. And so I think like it was way back, like Marcus Ranum, I think you'll remember better, like something in 2000 said you saying you want to kill the cockroaches, and every night you go out and leave food for them. And I think that's some of what we're doing. Like we're not just not winning against cancer, we actively smoking everything we can get our hands on. And so for a start, I'm saying let's stop doing that. And then we can start actually fixing stuff.
So that goes to that question, right? Is it too nihilistic, or do you have to give us all a shock treatment?
Yeah, I think we need a little bit of shock treatment. So at no point am I being completely nihilistic and saying, throw your hands up, don't do it. Like I think there's the famous Stockdale quote that says you never confuse the honesty of how bad your situation is with the hope that you'll prevail. So you still hope that you prevail, but you've got to take stock and say,
you have to be honest about the size of the problem.
We're broken right now.
Right.
And somehow we've all managed to become really okay with being really bad. Like we've really grown our tolerance for insecurity. And again, I think the big mistake that we're making there is we seem to think everyone's okay with it. But I think we now, so someone was talking the other day about the fact that like we got into the stuff and it was reasonably fun and games. And originally it was. And along the way it's gotten serious. Like it started to involve nation states. It started to involve policy. And lots of us are still kind of blasé about the stuff. And it's like that stuff's changing rapidly. And I think we've kind of now got stuck in the old way of thinking that says it's, yeah, you do your best, you show up, you have some fun, and I think we have to change because I think we're in trouble.
So let me get some reaction here from the review board. What do you think, Jen? Any reaction to that? Do you think that he's pretty much on spot, or do you think?
Yeah. So our rate of change, within the industry is outpacing the rate at which new technology is being released, but we aren't replacing old broken technology fast enough, and we're building more crap on top of crap. So yes, I even feel like security nihilism sometimes. I feel like this is an uncontrollable force, and I feel like maybe I don't want things to be electronic anymore. Like maybe I just don't want the kind of data that's being collected about me to be collected, and maybe I don't have control over it anymore. So, how do you fight that? You handle each problem separately. Security is not, some amorphous thing. It's not like something you can ever truly achieve. We base our assumptions about whether something is secure or not on things that are testable. Each individual thing is tested for each individual attack. So you can't say like, you can say, you know, overall it has a good security record, therefore it's reasonably secure product, but you can never say anything is truly secure.
No, it's like a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
Right. So, so that goes back to something where maybe we were talking about earlier, like, can anybody really think of any security problem we've actually really solved? Or are we just innovating and moving so quickly we leave all these problems in the dust? And so I was saying, you know, who's watched that movie War Games? Right? How many people think that we've ever solved the modem dial-up problem? Right? We just don't use modems anymore, but we never successfully solved that problem. Yeah. And so I'm thinking like, SQL injection, no. Buffer overload, no. Like, what have we ever really solved? And I don't want to go all doom and gloom, but like maybe if I could look at our past successes, I could predict our future successes. And I start looking in the past, I'm not finding
a whole lot.
Yeah.
It's super interesting. So I think it was, there's a professor called, I think it was Richard Danzig, who wrote this super cool paper called Surviving on a Diet of Poisoned Fruit. And he was talking about how the US government is going to survive through this software stuff. And he's saying pretty much the same thing. He's saying you've got to assume that the stuff's poisoned and you've got to consume just enough of it because you still need the nutrients. And he said a super interesting thing in the paper. So he's got an interesting background where like they threw him at nuclear proliferation and he goes away for a while and talks to everyone he can and comes back with here's a plan. And then they threw him at cyber and he did the same thing. And so someone asked him, what's the fundamental difference between cyber and nuclear? And he said, when you speak to people in nuclear, you go out, you question them, their answers last longer than 6 months. And he says, you go out, you talk to someone with cyber, you say, what are the top threats facing you now? He says, you go back in 6 months and ask them, and everything's changed.
Yeah.
And he gave some points that even I've forgotten about. He says DDoS was a solved problem. He says, so for a while, we really thought that DOS was gone. Like Arbor came in, everyone was running pipes, guys were dropping stuff all over the world. And suddenly it's not. Like suddenly DDoS is blackmail worthy again. And it's not because we're stupider, like I think there are things, it's just a different problem.
The attackers have gotten smarter.
Yeah, and that stuff's constantly going to be shifting.
I totally have the impression that things are turning, maybe not turning in circles, but trends are coming back. As you mentioned, denial of service. I've recently looked into Linux malware, and we see a rise there in denial of service bots that I thought had died out like 10 years ago.
Linux denial of service bots.
Yeah, infecting not necessarily endpoints, but home routers or devices we don't think about.
Oh, embedded devices.
Exactly. And the same thing is happening with exploitation. So I mean, today it's fairly difficult to create an exploit for a fully patched Windows workstation, for example. But if you want to start on learning exploitation, I recently got the hint to start on embedded systems, which still come with the problems we saw on workstations 15 years ago. And it's actually true. I mean, if you look at exploitation of embedded systems, you're having buffer overflows that we thought have died out.
Well, that's a good point on the embedded systems. It makes me want to ask about, Internet of Things and in self-driving cars and CPE equipment where, I'm really concerned that we don't have a game plan on Internet of Things and we're just going to be here 3 years from now talking about it. And the question is, how do these devices update themselves? And in Washington, D.C., where I'm living, there's a lot of policy discussions around Internet of Things, and they're referring to it it's called the ladder problem. So, like, you change your cell phone every 2 years or so, 3 years at max, right? How often do you change your smoke detector, right? And to change your smoke detector, you need a ladder and a screwdriver. And so the long tail of these embedded devices are going to be 10 to 15 years. Right? Right now, we're running past all these mobile problems because we just keep getting a new phone. You're not going to run past the embedded smoke detector problem. You're going to have that forever. The embedded toaster problem. And so we're going to enter this new world that we're not ready for. There's no upgrade path. You update your PC on a rotation. You don't update your toaster, really.
So
So
Dan Gear.
will this going to be on your next talk about?
So I think I'm going to not talk for, but Dan Gear addresses that and says, look, if you're putting out embedded stuff, you've got two options. You've got to have an admin interface so that you can patch it, or it's got to be built to die. And if you don't have one of those two things, you've got a problem. And of course, once you have an admin interface, you've now got the same problem. And someone raised over dinner the other day, just to make it more dramatic, you've got that same problem in pacemakers. You've got that same problem in steering wheels that are, so yeah, it's a problem. And I think just to add to the grief, the rate of change that Jen was talking about is just going to go up and up. Like everyone can order a kit that allows you to build your IoT stuff now. And for a ray of hope, like the one thing, part of the reason our web was so insecure was because the web was, the way it was all architected, it allowed the lowest common denominator to build a website and then browsers that could see that site.
Right.
And I think if you looked at it not with your security hat on, it's been massively successful. Like it's driven commerce that wasn't planned for, and it's made squillions. And maybe that's how the stuff goes. Like maybe it goes as far as it can without being completely horribly broken. And then where it can, it will be patched to a reasonable amount.
Sort of like acceptable losses.
Yeah.
In credit card or.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying that is the answer. I'm saying maybe that's what happens. Like maybe we just keep getting to the absolute brink before someone comes along and does a little bit of patching there and then moves us on to be extremely vulnerable in some new area. Yeah.
But that reminds me a bit of something you addressed in your keynote when you mentioned the domain admin problem. Someone has domain control over a domain admin that he basically has all the keys to the kingdom. I see so many cases where, for example, people have hackable toasters and attach them to their company network, which is something that we should have learned 15 years ago not to do, and we're still doing it. So we're getting back to the point where we're turning in circles. We're like going back to security principles to like what we should be thinking of before we talk about kernel exploits.
Well, I've always thought that we're at this inflection point where we're going to IPv6, which sounds like a great time to upgrade all of your routers and equipment. So if our CP equipment on our routers were actually more secure, here's a purchasing cycle where we could actually move in more secure devices. Except, as you were talking about earlier, they're actually not more secure. So we're going to get these devices that speak v6, and then people will just sit on them again for the long tail. And so I keep trying to grasp on positive notes here, and I'm not finding a lot. Right? So I'm hoping the audience can save me, because we've been doing this for decades. Yeah. And you know, maybe we're just eternal optimists. One of the talks I saw here that I found really fascinating was the GPS spoofing, location spoofing talk. And partially just because I'm fascinated by GPS and that interaction between like physical location or orbiting satellites and security decisions. And I remember a couple of years ago, companies were trying to sell these solutions where we'll grab your location off your phone, and if you're at the company and then you're trying to log in, we'll make this decision that you're probably, you know, should be authenticated or authorized. But now it turns out, right, for $300, the researchers can spoof GPS. And then for free, they can spoof Wi-Fi, you know, location. And so part of me was like, that's awesome, because now we've killed that, or potentially killed that concept that we're just going to grab our location and use that as a security decision. Right? It was always a little dubious, but now for $300, we just kill that. And pretty soon it'll be $150. So I'm wondering, are there other areas where we've either killed off, or technologies have come along and pretty much squashed good ideas that we're never going to survive? So can we point to, you know, either...
You're still looking desperately for something.
Yeah, you see me grasping for straws? Yeah.
Yeah, something like we can say, woohoo, we killed that one.
We killed it, yeah.
Yes and no, right? So if you use an ORM and you use it the way it's intended out of the box, and you never go and create queries against the database directly, then you have eliminated SQL injection from your web app. But most people have to go outside of the box. So yes and no, right? We create these fixes that are intended to eliminate an entire class of vulnerabilities and also make things easier for a developer. But if we don't take the time to do developer training, they still make a mistake.
Right. I mean, that's like, why can we still go to Google and when you query for code examples, the examples are almost always insecure. And that's what the developers are cutting and pasting.
Yeah. I think there, again, and to your point, I think there's some hope. Like I said, I think despite the fact that everything's ownable, software security in some places has made good jumps. And I've praised Microsoft, I can now go and praise OpenBSD. Theo just recently put out a presentation where he spoke against optional security measures. And actually, I think there's something to that. Like normally you look at some of his rants and you think like that's ridiculous, Theo from OpenBSD. And you look at his stuff and you say he's made it so impractical that that's why only 100 people are using OpenBSD as the default OS. But
well, they can't get past the install screen.
Yeah, download the multiple disks. But I think he's got a point, and I think maybe we're getting to the point where we see that it's enough of a problem that we can now start saying to developers, when Microsoft did their shift, like one of the things they did was just ban a whole bunch of calls. Like you just can't do, it sounds stupid, a stir cat anymore or stir copy anymore. And like I think we can start taking some of that thinking into the rest of the stuff we do. But in truth, I think one of the things we're seeing now is, like you mentioned earlier, something about hackers going into management. In truth, I don't think we have enough of a body of knowledge of how to do this properly yet. If you take software engineering, like for a long while it was just try software stuff. And then you started seeing guys come out with making it a science and making it management. And we've not gotten there yet. And on the one hand, there's technological progress that makes it hard. But there's other stuff that we haven't figured out. And I think we're now starting to get to the point where we've got to start codifying some of that stuff, figuring out some of that stuff. Figuring out what's the optimum size for a security team. Like in software, a whole while ago, Fred Brooks put out the Mythical Man Month. Like, so he told everyone at that point, like, adding more developers to a project doesn't help you. And like, you see the fact that Target had 300 security guys. And like, one of the things I wonder is like, do you think they needed 300 security guys? Or if they paid like 4 times the market rate and hired Dino and Helva,
right,
like, would they be in a better position? And I'm starting to think we can start getting to, like, once we start thinking about that sort of stuff, we can hopefully start making more inroad into those things. But I don't think we're there. I think we've just gotten bad enough that we know we need to try something different, and maybe we'll go there.
I don't know. I recently heard another researcher, I don't remember the name, someone said that security is taking themselves too important. I do get the feeling from our community, not that it's not important, but that people put the focus on the wrong things. Because as we talk about Target, I see a lot of talk about breaches and laughing about the victim. Well, what we as a community should actually do is actually, help the situation, construct built-in security and help the situation get better. But what we spend most time on is talking about what other people did wrong. So in terms of the security team of Target, I'm pretty sure they had talented people there. What they would have needed though was only one guy thinking about that exact alert that they missed. That's a question of how we in total can teach the right people or teach the people the right things to think about, instead of saying, oh, you did wrong.
How do you teach attack, right? That is the fundamental question, because, there was a great talk at the conference. It was like off Rails on the crazy train. And it was fantastic if you are a Rails developer and you want to learn about securing your authentication and authorization in a Rails app. But, that is a targeted talk for developers, the kind of thing we should be doing, right, as a community. And we do a lot of that with OWASP and other things. Those are all great, but we have to teach the idea of what an attack is fundamentally and how to perform attacks from a step backwards.
I was talking to some university educators, and all the universities in the United States are basically desperate to put out security professionals, right? Because that's what companies want to hire. And I remember talking to this lady, and she was like, what should we teach? What should we do? And I said, you know, I'm wondering what your college lawyer would say if you start teaching how to attack. And that just shut her up. She was like, okay, I probably can't teach that.
Yeah.
I'm like, but that's what some of those skills are actually needed, and you're structurally blocked from providing some of the insight,
Yeah.
right? You mentioned something that I want to come back to, which was, how many here, I was just curious, show of hands, how many here remember that moment when all of a sudden you realized you had to make sort of a transition from heads down technical to more policy, right, more management? If you wanted to be effective, you realized you actually had to interact and translate business needs, right? Did anybody kind of have that, oh my God, I've got to learn a little bit of policy now? Man, yeah. And so I think that helped us a bit. And the watershed moment for me was when Google came out and said that China had attacked them. Because now all of a sudden it was okay for the C-suite to talk about being attacked.
Right.
And that allowed a new class of conversation to occur that we could never sort of penetrate up into the board of the sea level. I'm sort of seeing that now again because of either the Snowden leaks, right? That's a new type of conversation we're allowed to have. And then the talk you heard at the very beginning of the show on Wassenaar. And that seems to point to me, okay, we've kind of having to live with management. Now we have to get into policy. And now you're going to have to translate technical security things into policy. And that's a new area for us that we're not comfortable with. And so it's an opportunity and a risk. And I'm curious on your thoughts of that. If we get it right, great for the industry. If we get it wrong, we end up with really terrible policy outcomes. You know, are you trying to think, would you advocate for people to try to get involved in policy?
Yes. So on the one hand,
Yeah.
I think if you look at how well we've done with management, you almost want to say,
No?
so far we tried it technically, we tried it in management, let's go to Congress. But in truth, I think we have to. Like FX has given a whole talk, and almost anything, any topic that's interesting, FX has said it right already or said something smart about it already. And at some point, he and Sergey Bratis effectively said, look, if we don't do it, who is? Right. And there's just a point where we've got to figure out that we've got to step up to some of that stuff.
Well, there's this concept of those closest to the knob have a responsibility,
Yeah.
right? You're closest to the problem, so therefore you bear a certain responsibility to...
And I think fundamentally some of us, it's funny because, again, I mentioned in my talk, I heard some of the old Mudge talks fairly recently. And he was talking about going to Congress and the famous loft goes to Congress. And one of the things he stepped back and said is like, you know, despite everything you see, there's smart people there. But they have your hearing on IoT, and then they have a hearing on whether grain should be imported this year, and then they have a hearing on whether, I don't know, light bulbs should... And so for all of them, you've got some junior staffer coming in, giving them a file, and that's how they're making their calls. And if we're not in that file or adding some sense to that file, then we can't complain when nonsense comes out the other end. I think one of the dangers with it, though, and it might lead to a whole different topic, is even amongst ourselves, we don't easily have... so you can't easily
there's no
say...
easy consensus solution, right?
Exactly. So you don't have consensus. We don't have easily chosen representatives. Like, I can't think of too many people who I'd say, I'd like him representing my fate at the upper levels. But I think we have to. Like, the easy answer is, I think, to not play there is stupid because the world changes around us and you'd rather be involved than not. So, yeah, I don't think it's an option to stay away from it.
Okay, so I have another question to everybody, and then we'll go to some questions from the audience, hopefully. So, in your view, pick one or two things. You know, what will help? Are you seeing technologies on the future? I mentioned V6, not that it's necessarily a security technology, but are you seeing things, DNSSEC or RPKI, or are you seeing certain technologies that will, you think over the next 5 to 10 years will fundamentally change things? Or if there are no transformative technologies, are we just looking for the long slog, more of the same? And we're just going to be playing whack-a-mole. You know, maybe it's a new development, a platform, or maybe it's, you know, everybody goes to Chromebooks and life is saved, or everybody goes to the cloud. Let's start with Jen.
Yeah, go for it.
So my answer, and you're not going to like it, is that technologies will come, technologies will go, at the end of the day, we need to limit the data that we're storing about people, because you're dealing with free nations where you don't know what random teenager is going to become the elected official that represents a country. And their data is stored in random websites created by irresponsible people working at startups and that don't care. They care about pushing product out the door. They care about fuck it, ship it. They don't care about security at all. And so some of them are very good. I don't mean to put them all down.
Right.
So we need to think about recommending limiting data. We have a responsibility to the companies we work for to make that
So then
recommendation.
maybe, let me transcribe your answer. More anonymity systems would be useful.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, for that approach, I think I have a rather radical idea about how to make things better. So I remember recently I was working on one single slide for a slide deck, coming up with ideas how to make things better. And I put together 5 points, which are two-factor authentication, compartmentalization, secrecy, encryption, and training. So with these 5 measurements, I think we're making a step forward instead of fighting ghosts by trying to detect or defend attacks that we either can't see or...
so, and those technologies already exist, so it's really just applying known solutions.
Exactly. I mean, as we're running in circles, we could just pick up old ideas and make them good again, just like the attackers do.
Yeah, I think we're getting there in a few ways. Like, if you take if you're working on an iPad and an iOS device, typically safer from most attacks than you were on any machine. So despite what it means for the freedom-loving liberal in you, the death of the general-purpose computer.
Yeah, the walled garden, I love it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So end of general-purpose computer in a walled garden, talking to a proprietary web service. But in truth, it's an interesting thing. That does give you some measure of security. And a while back, like at the Source Boston keynote that Dan Geer gave like about 7 years ago, he kind of ended with saying, at some point you're going to have to figure out that security is not safe. And he says, like, if you want to be secure, that's what it's going to take you to. And like everything, he does it like super poetically, and he says the technology that
whenever Dan speaks, I imagine like cursive, like a founding father writing a document, you know.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah.
But he ends with a monologue that says something like, the technology that can keep you safe, perfectly safe, is the technology that can take it all away.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're going right now. And I think people kind of mostly make that trade-off pretty openly. Like most security guys I know started off saying, iOS is the devil, we'll all use Android phones. Right. And then pretty quickly made that swap and said, actually, I'd just be happy, just give me an iOS device, which makes Google's move to go from the one thing they were offering that was secure with their Chromebooks to
Android,
the most exploited platform there is on mobile. Like, I'm not sure what's driving that. But anyway, I think, yes, there is some hope with these built secure endpoints. And no matter what people say, they are more secure.
And then I want to hear your points real quickly on cloud, because you were saying that's one of the points that...
Yeah, so it's funny because like in 2007, we did clobbering the cloud, which was a way to hit almost every cloud vendor there is. But fundamentally, I think the cloud is going to become a viable option for lots of small businesses, largely because we were so broken with this old model. And Marcus Ranum says, like he's super insulting about it. He says, that's right, you couldn't solve it here, so now you're going to solve it by giving it all away.
Right.
And you need to understand at some point you've got to pay. Like all you're doing is pushing the debt away from you, and at some point it's going to cost you. So you move it all to the cloud, you don't have security and IR teams. When it goes wrong, you now need to hire people for 10 times the cost if you just did it right. But practically, I think the cloud's going to be an option. Google can secure Gmail better than most people today can secure SendMail. Like if you're running SendMail or XM, firstly, good luck finding someone who knows what a SendMail macro is these days. But most small companies, if you ask me, are they better off running their own SendMail or running Gmail? They're probably better off running Gmail. If you take away the government border stuff, And that's going to be across the line. Are you better hosting your own infrastructure or running it on AWS? And people will tell you there's a hypervisor exploit and AWS was in danger. And I'm willing to bet that Amazon patched their hypervisor exploits a squillion times faster than your average organization does.
Right.
And that shift's going to keep happening, right? Because they're going to keep hiring the smart folks. If you work with hypervisors, do you want to work at Bob's Fishing Company or do you want to work at Amazon? You're going to move to Amazon. So they're going to suck up all the talent.
Right.
And it's going to be a reasonable paradigm. So you're going to have Google Beyond Corp type stuff, which says you're going to have a secure Chromebook or a secure iPad that's then talking over an encrypted tunnel to a vendor who you've then got a contract with, who you can then hopefully hold liable when they drop you. And yeah, I think that's
when, not if.
Yeah, no, sooner or later it'll happen. But I think that's where it's going to go. And I think it's a reasonable place for it to go.
Okay, let's see who's got something in the audience. You, sir, all the way in the back. Anybody want to comment on that?
I think dog fooding is an excellent idea. And I think people within the security industry are always terrified that they will become a target of a common attack. So, yes.
So I totally agree with what you said at the first, be the change you want to see. But that goes back to, I think, you've got to walk the walk and talk the talk. And so even if it's painful, right, if you advocate everybody uses two-factor, then you better use it yourself, or you're kind of a charlatan, right? And then you can learn through that pain, like maybe how to make it better. But the other examples you used, unfortunately, were brought about through legislation.
Yeah.
And so what I was talking about, like we're getting closer to policy, we're getting closer to policy at the point where policy is getting closer to us to legislate. And I think as soon as we have a large incident, whether it's Internet of Things or connected toaster burns down a house, we'll start seeing legislation show up. Because the industry has not shown that it can regulate itself. The thing I always point to is BCP 38 and 84 and source address validation, right? You can still send spoof traffic in 2015. And we've known about this problem for 20 years. We understand it. We've studied it. We know the impacts of filtering it. And we can't solve the most simple, well-understood problem there is. So what confidence do we have that we're going to solve this more complicated, situation? And so don't be surprised if one day BCP 38 gets legislated, right? And so I'm starting to think that maybe a little liability is a good thing. People respond to signals. So I'm kind of curious on your thoughts about liability, right? Does the software shrink wrap license survive contact with the Internet of Things and smart cars?
Yeah, so almost everyone smarter, who's opined on this has said we got to get liability in. That unless we introduce vendor liability, we're never going to fix the problem. For me, it's tough. Personally, I never like the government stepping in just because they almost always muddy the water. But I think there's got to be something that forces people's hands. In exactly the seatbelt discussion, like it happens after the Ralph Nader steps in. And I suspect we're heading that way whether we like it or not. I don't know that it's the right answer, but I think it doesn't matter. It's going to happen.
Let's go to the audience again. Sir? Or ma'am? I'm sorry.
To come back to what you're saying on sort of prevention and training and
Right.
And again, we hear it asking for more technology. We hear about iPhone, iPad, more accessibilities, and
So what's the question?
my question is like, sorry, in terms of trainings, Manuel said one of the five things she would say. Would you, I mean, can you audit, self-audit for enterprise? Would you say training would come out or like is self-audit with consulting is an option?
So changing the corporate culture to maybe self-audit, you're saying? Maybe that's a...
I mean, the security industry itself kind of has this conclusion that smart people are going to save the situation. At least that's what I get from various discussions. The smart people don't like walk straight out of university, but they need to be trained, they need to be educated. No, I think, I mean, that's one of my personal pet peeves, but I think the security community is imbalanced for, well, mainly for its lack of diversity. So yesterday I had an interesting discussion with how the diversity is a point that with, let's say with more diversity, we could actually add people to the industry, as we have a massive lack of talent already. By creating more diversity, we could invite other groups that are not present now to participate and to make a greater security community overall. So in terms of training people, how do your security people get the right knowledge? That's, I think, an unsolved problem. Companies nowadays, from what I get, for example, from our customers, is that they are not aware that they have a problem with their security, and that starts at the point where they don't know where the data actually resides that is important, or that this data is actually important, that could end up being breached in the end. So
That's step one. First, acknowledge you have a problem before you can even, the companies can even go on to step two of maybe increasing diversity or betting a better security team if they don't. So we have time for one last question, and then we're going to...
There's a guy down there looking.
Okay, who's the guy down there? Okay.
So I want to combine the Internet of Things and sort of embedded problem of not being able to update with some of the last remarks of Harun. Do you think we will all, our end users, embedded problems and Internet of Things problems will be solved once there is the iToaster? The iOven, because not only will Apple own the core or sign off on all the code that runs on that system, they will be able to force updates on you and push like security fixes as AWS implements the latest fixes, right? Apple will do those fixes. But also if Apple does it, suddenly all the end users want that iToaster.
So you're saying in the future, everything will be owned by Apple?
I guess so, yeah.
I don't know if you remember when the Apple batteries would explode and burst into flame. Yeah.
There are some disadvantages.
Yeah.
I, for one, welcome our new shiny overlords.
Yeah.
So I think there's a complex answer hidden in there, and I know everybody's just about getting ready to run. I think the short answer is there is a solution that goes down that path. There is a solution that you live in a walled garden world, and it's safer and it's better. But I think there's a hidden lesson for us in there, which is, I'm not sure how many of you remember, but a little while back, Microsoft tried Palladium, okay, which was DRM all the way down, and it would have been based off a TPM, it would have been secure, and everyone freaked out. Like, we all went, this is the end of the world, like, get away from us. And it's what Apple did when they went with, and it's where Apple are increasingly going to, and almost all of us are okay with it. And so lots of people's natural reaction is you see sheeple, blah, blah, blah. But I think the lesson in there for us is something that Moxie's taught us really well with his Signal and stuff, which is you've got to be secure and better, not just secure. And so one of the things that in my keynote I was hoping to try to encourage us to do is for more of us to start building products that are good products and also happen to be secure.
Yeah.
Because I think that that's the way we're going to have to win. And I think it's a whole new set of challenges for us. Like when you start playing the product game, it's different. But I do think there's hope there. So yeah, iToaster. Woo.
So on the iToaster, we're going to close it out. Thank you for attending. Some of us will be around afterward, and hopefully you don't get rained on. So thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you next year.